Greetings, sailors, and welcome to an emergency stand-in kind of video, but not really. The reason why it is kind of, but not really, is this is footage I had already recorded, and I've still been sleeping terribly, so it's put my video making schedule completely out, and of course, sleeping terribly means I've been not feeling super 100% either. And I actually thought I was starting to get my sleep schedule back towards relative normality-ish. But then last night in particular, it was another one of those nights where I just couldn't get to sleep until like after 6 in the morning. So that threw out today completely. And it's meant I've been feeling a bit kind of muzzy-headed the whole day as well. So before I get on to the actual the subject of this video, which is going to be much more about gameplay mechanics than maybe the ship itself, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping and say I'm aware I've had a lot of Warships videos recently, and of course that's because we've had the German line coming out, we've had the Dunkerque, that's we still don't know when it's being sold, but I presume relatively soon, and the Scharnhorst as well, and the announcement that there's going to be the first of the Royal Navy lines, and it's going to be a light cruiser line, and we already knew that it was likely to be a light cruiser line, well, a cruiser line. We didn't know it was going to be light cruisers, but it's been definitely confirmed by Wargaming. And what I had previously heard is that they would come in September, but that's probably... Well, I don't know, actually. It might still be September, because they've been announced now in August, so it might still be sometime in September those come out. Anyway, that's just what I heard. Anyway, it's just a rumour. So yeah, what I'm going to do is, instead of putting out the Tier 9 and 10 video for the German battleships, I am going to finish off the Supporter Week videos first, and then later in the week I'll have the Tier 9 and 10. Because doing tiers 3 through 5 wasn't so bad, but the tiers 6 through 8 turned into a real monster of a video, and that took quite a long time to do. So if nothing else, it's going to be like nice just to do some normal replays for a change. So we're going to do that. We're going to finish off the Support Week. We're going to have probably Sunday, Monday, Tuesday be Support Week videos, and then not sure, might do Crusader Kings on Wednesday, and then like the Tier 9 and 10 video on Thursday as a very rough schedule, presuming that I manage, you know, not to have another night like last night, which just completely messes up the whole day. So on to the subject at hand. Well, kind of, it's the Dunkerque, and it's a specific thing about the Dunkerque because some information has come to light. Now, at various times people have data mined the Warships client to find things out that you just can't see in the in-port stats. And one of those things is the sigma values. Now, sigma values, if you are unaware, are what makes up part of the dispersion stat, because it's not just one simple stat like World of Tanks, where it's given as a value of the maximum dispersion at 100 meters. So it's the maximum possible deviation a shell can have at 100 meters after you've fired it. There's nothing like that. And actually, it's just more complicated in warships generally, because there are a vertical dispersion figure and also a horizontal dispersion figure. Now, sigma is the vertical dispersion figure. That is how over or under your shell will fall. There's also the horizontal figure, which is, you know, if you think about the vertical being, say you've got compass rose, the vertical is the north-south axis, the horizontal is obviously the east-west axis. So something might have a really good horizontal dispersion but a really poor sigma value, then obviously that's going to have a rather different feeling guns than vice versa. So bear in mind, when I'm talking about sigma values, it's not the whole picture. And even just in terms of dispersion, it's not the whole picture, because there are several other factors that are not directly connected but do have an effect on your perception of dispersion. So what's been data mined is the sigma values. For some reason, it's never the horizontal dispersion values. Maybe they are just in a format where it's really hard to make sense of them. It's maybe just not obvious where in the client data they are, whereas the sigma values are, I think, fairly well defined. It's fairly easy to go and find them if you know what you're looking for. So what, I mean, there was a thread on Reddit previously, but what somebody has done, I can't remember the guy's name now, it's like Vexa or something. Basically, he went and updated it. He's pulled out the updated sigma values from, because it hadn't been updated in a while, and some of the US battleship sigma values have changed in, I think, 5.6. It's a while ago anyway, and of course there's new German battleships and new premiums since then. So he has pulled out the updated figures, and we now have bang up-to-date sigma values. And we can tell now that the Dunkerque has a sigma value of 1.7, which is meant that I am both right and wrong when I was talking about this feeling like it had average dispersion. Because a lot of people, especially on the subreddit, and I've looked at one or two forum posts as well, but a lot of people have been insisting it's got really awful dispersion, like, you know, the worst in the game. And that isn't actually true, not by quite a margin. Now, 1.7 isn't great. And it's one of these things where it depends how you slice and dice it, because I'm both right and wrong when I said it was average. Compared to other Tier 6 battleships, which range from 1.5 for the New Mexico and the Fuso to 2.0 for the Warspite, you know, 1.7 is somewhere in the middle, and if you actually look at the average figure, it's 1.72. So 1.7 is very slightly below average, very, very slightly. So, okay, I was right, it's average. Well, it's average for Tier 6. It's not average for a premium battleship, however. If you look at the averaged figure for battleships, which the Arkansas Beta is by far the worst with 1.5. Most of them are 1.8. Well, actually, I say most of them. They're kind of actually split between 1.8 and 1.2. 1.2? What? 1.8 and 2.0. So that gives an average of 1.84. Now, that doesn't include the König Albert, which is an upcoming premium low-tier German battleship. We have no idea when that's going to hit the game, but anyway, I didn't include that figure. I just went with stuff we have in the game, or in the case of the Dunkerque, is presumably about to be imminently released. 1.84 versus 1.7. This is the worst of the premium battleships, barring the Arkansas Beta. And technically, you could argue the Arkansas Beta, it's a premium ship, behaves as a premium ship, but you didn't have to buy it. It was basically a gift from Wargaming. So if you take that out of the equation, this is the worst. And it's not like 1.7 is massively far behind 1.8, but it's still the worst. So it is both average and also the worst. And bear in mind, again, I will repeat, this is just the sigma values. We don't know the horizontal values. Maybe it's got really good horizontal dispersion for a battleship. Now, as I said, there are other factors. You can't just take dispersion as the whole thing. It is obviously very important, but when it comes to your perception of how the guns behave, there's two other factors, or at least I think there's two other factors. Other people might disagree with me, or they might include other things, but the two things I think are also important are the shell velocities and the number of guns. Now, as I said, New Mex and the Fuso both have a figure of 1.5. which is, you know, that's not good. And yet you look at the Fuso's dispersion per kilometre, which is a very rough and ready figure. Like, it's not something you can really use to calculate anything in particular, because from what I've been told, the dispersion in the game doesn't work like that. It's not a linear thing. But you look at it as a dispersion per kilometre figure, and the Fuso looks fantastic, but it's also got this terrible sigma. Well, it's I guess it's the maximum possible dispersion of the Fuso is limited because of its if it scaled linearly in line with the other Tier 6 battleships, it would probably be a much worse maximum dispersion figure that you'd get given in client. But I suspect it's limited because of its range. It's got by far the longest range of any of the Tier 6 battleships. So there's, you know, in theory it's terrible, but you've got a lot of guns on both those ships. Both of those ships have 12 guns each. So that's why they don't necessarily feel that horrible in terms of their accuracy. And again, we don't know what the horizontal accuracy is. It might be really good on both those ships to make up for the worst in tier sigma value. So you compare it to that, and this doesn't feel so bad. But it's also got fewer guns. But then on the Dunkerque, you've also got the factor that, and let's bring the Warspite into the picture now, which has, it's got the same number of guns, But the turret configuration is such that, like this situation here, this is, you know, my armor's not going to hold up to this, but I only need it to hold up for a little while because this Tirpitz is going down. We are focusing him hard. But in this situation with the Warspite, I could only get 2 of my turrets. I could only get my forward turrets on this guy. So I'd have half the firepower available. So that's, you know, that's the thing that has to be taken into consideration with Dunkirk specifically, and also the Izumo at higher tiers. Well, actually, maybe not even so much the Izumo, because you've got that bloody awkward third turret that doesn't even, like, it has to turn all the way backwards to point from side to side. So there's that, but more specifically with the Warspite, there's also the fact that it has a Sigma value of 2.0, and this has got 1.7. Now, the Warspite is by far the best at tier 6, but it's also got by far the worst shell velocity at tier 6 with those 15-inch guns. So this is where shell velocity comes in. And this is more situational. This is more to do with which targets you're firing at. Now this here, I'm firing at a destroyer. Look how little lead I have to give. With the Warspite, this would be much harder because the shell velocity, and I'm just going by memory here, but it's something close to 100 meters per second worse. I can't remember if it's over 100 or less than 100 meters per second, but either way, there's a big difference. The Dunkirk's guns are really fast in terms of their shell velocity. They are by far the best at tier 6, and they're almost as good as the Scharnhorst. There's not much of a gap between them at all. So, if you're firing at, say, a cruiser or a destroyer, the fact that your shells can get there quicker means they have less chance to dodge out of the way. And therefore, this also has an effect on your, not necessarily your accuracy, but let's say your hit rate, your potential hit rate. However, turn it on its head, let's say you're facing a slow battleship, at which point the slower shell speed of the Warspite becomes less of an issue because battleships can dodge out of the way less well. And the Sigma value then becomes much more useful because your shots will land on the plane where you want them to land rather than either over or under. So, based on that factor alone, it makes the Dunkirk better at fighting faster ships than something like the Warspite. And so this is why it's difficult to talk about dispersion and accuracy in simple terms in World of Warships, because it's not simple at all. There's all these different factors. It's not just your horizontal and vertical dispersion, it's also how much firepower you can put out. And you could also even argue that maybe the gun reload is actually a factor as well. Like, this is one of the balancing things on the Scharnhorst, is it gets a 20-second reload. So maybe it doesn't matter so much that your dispersion isn't that great. Although actually, I have to say on the Scharnhorst, the Sigma value is 2.0, except the dispersion still doesn't feel that good, so maybe it's got really poor horizontal dispersion. But of course, then shell penetration comes into play. Maybe you're getting lots of hits, but they're bouncing. Whereas this doesn't really seem to struggle that much, despite the fact that it's got 13-inch guns versus everybody else's 14 or 15-inch guns. So, yeah, I just thought of that. Shell penetration, that also could be considered a factor, potentially. It's not simple. It's not at all simple. So, I was both right and wrong. And I don't know what to say about that, except I thought it was worth talking about. I thought it bore some more in-depth discussion, because these figures came out and I thought they were interesting. So that brings me on to actually possible buffs for the Dunkirk, because despite the fact it's not actually on sale yet, people are already talking about, oh my god, it needs buffs. Now, there's a couple of things actually I can kind of agree that maybe it could stand to be buffed. People have data mined the fact that it has the same turret hit points as the Fuso, for instance, except if you lose a turret on the Fuso, it's not such a big deal. It's only 2 guns. If you lose a turret on the Dunkirk, it's a massive deal because it's half of your firepower. It's just gone. So, absolutely, the turrets need to be tougher. Like, that one's a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. Now, I would like that turret mechanic just to be reworked anyway, and maybe I'll discuss that in some separate video at some point. I think it's an incredibly unrewarding mechanic because the TLDR version is you get detonated, which is also an incredibly RNG thing. You get a flag. And for the next 10 games, you can have that flag on your ship, and you are guaranteed not to be detonated. Does that happen with turret knockouts? No, it's still incredibly RNG, but it's not like you then get a flag where you can stick it on your ship and be guaranteed for no turret knockouts for the next 10 games. Just, it doesn't happen. You get flags for all these other things except turret knockouts. Turret knockouts just shaft you with no reward. Anyway, maybe I don't need to do a video, I've just, covered the whole thing. So that's the thing I would change. More turret health, or, well, more armor on the turrets maybe? Except, no, I think just more turret health. It needs to be way harder to knock out these turrets. Same hit points as a Fuso. I would say, no, I don't think that is actually good enough. And bear in mind when I'm talking about possible buffs, nobody's played this ship yet apart from the super testers and my fellow YouTubers and streamers. Wargaming probably won't touch it. Well, I mean, it might be tweaked a little bit before release, but they won't do any major changes to it before they've gathered some data for at least a patch or so, if not longer. Would I change Sigma values? I'm kind of okay with the Sigma values as they are. More accuracy would be nice, but there's things I'd rather see over that. And one of those, and this is a case that, okay, it's been made by people that haven't actually played it, but it's logical, a better reload on these guns. You've got the least caliber at this tier. But do you get an especially, do you have an advantage in reload for having the smallest caliber? No, you've actually got the same reload as the Fuso, which has way more guns, as we've covered, and it has bigger guns. So even though it has a worse Sigma value, it's still better off. So I won't go as far as one of the suggestions I saw on the Warships subreddit, which was to give it basically the same reload as the Scharnhorst, which would probably make this ship, in fact, massively OP for its tier. If you could get these 13-inch shells out every 20 seconds, these are not the Scharnhorst guns. It's not even just the difference between 11 inches and 13 inches. I think these feel, to me, almost as good as the 14-inch guns in terms of... I mean, they won't overmatch much, but the 14-inch guns don't overmatch much either. So when you've got the right targets, when you've got broadsides, I didn't struggle to do damage with the hits that I got. That was okay. So that would be OP, but giving it, say, a 26-second reload, same as the Tirpitz and the Gneisenau, which both have 15-inch guns, so, bigger guns, I think that would not be unreasonable. But I think that's one where, time will tell. Time will tell. The biggest thing that I would like to see, though, is, well, actually two things. I'm going back to turret health here, aren't I? Secondary turrets. The secondary turrets, I've had games, or I had games, I don't actually have this on my account anymore, but I had games once or twice where basically all the secondaries just got wiped out. And I think I mentioned this on the video I did, what was it? Talk about the Bayern or something like that, or possibly the Gneisenau. But yeah, having all your turrets knocked out is incredibly frustrating, especially when your AA is poor to begin with, and then you've suddenly got no AA at all. You've only got 5 secondary turrets. Losing one turret can potentially cost you 25% of your secondaries. And your secondaries are the greater part of your anti-aircraft power as well, so it's not good. It's not good that they're so easy to knock out, so I feel like your secondaries could be a bit tougher. But anyway, that's by the by, that's just a thing that just occurred to me. But the main thing I would like to see, above all else, is better torpedo bulge protection, because it's not good. And I did discuss this in the first look video. It is among the worst. It's not the worst. The Warspite and the Bayern both have worse torpedo bulge protection, but this is like third worst, so... Given the length of it, given the fact that it can't dodge out the way as the Warspite can, and it doesn't have the AA power to deter carriers, same tier carriers, in fact even probably tier 5 carriers would pose a serious threat to you. Tier 8 carriers would just, if you came up against a Strike Lexington or a Shikaku, they would, if they wanted to, just blow you out the water with comparative ease. You've got nothing to stop them. You can't particularly dodge out the way. You don't have the torpedo mitigation. It's a long ship. And it's a long ship because it's a... Well, I was going to say it's a long ship because it's a fast ship. No, it's a fast ship because it's a long ship. That's how... one of the reasons why the fast battleships tended to be longer ships, just from the nature of it's how hydrodynamics works basically. It has been explained to me in the past, and I forget the exact technical reason why, but long is good if you want to go fast. Anyway, but that means it cannot turn nearly as well as the Warspite. It does not have the comparatively good AA of say the New Mexico, so you're kind of a bit stuffed if carriers in particular want to come for you. Destroyers you might be able to do something about, but carriers not really. You're entirely relying on other people. You might want to, if you happen to pick one of these up, you might want to make it a point to always go in a division with someone in a Cleveland, for instance. So that is a thing. That's the one thing. If I was going to buff, I would buff the torpedo protection. But, the turrets need probably a buff as well, and things like the reload would be nice, or maybe slightly better Sigma, I don't know. But time will tell on the Dunkirk. I still kind of like it overall. Having played through however many battles I played through, I would be perfectly happy to own one of these. But there are situations when it's absolutely going to suck, and it could be mitigated to some extent. It has some definite and very real weaknesses, this ship, but of course on the upside it also has some definite and very real strengths as well. So this was rather a more in-depth discussion of game mechanics than I usually go into, but I thought it might be interesting, especially these Sigma values having come out. I'll actually also link that Reddit thread below, so you can go and look yourselves at the Sigma values for the various tiers. But again, bear in mind, Sigma's not everything. It's just one part of the dispersion stat. So hopefully you found this interesting, and if you have, and you've got any technical comments or corrections to make, you can leave those below. You can hit the like button. You can sub to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.